the world you're joining in. Greetings from the Department of Computer Science and Engineering, Saintgits College of Engineering. I welcome you all to day 3 of this AICT-sponsored 6-day STTP on blockchain applications. We have strived our best to provide you with the best speakers possible from around the world who have made remarkable contributions to the awesome world of blockchain technology. Today, we have with us Dr. Robert Laidlaw, who is a medical doctor from Australia. He's also founder of 2 digital health startups in Sydney, one of which is Secure Health Chain. He is an invited member of the National Expert Reference Panel. He's also a blockchain in Healthcare Today ambassador for Australian chapter, and he was selected to be part of the WHO roster for digital health experts in the year 2019 and was the co-chair of the Blockchain Australia Healthcare Working Group. 5x real-world applications of blockchain technology in healthcare. Yes, I know we are all excited to know more. Dr. Robert, we are really excited to have you in our midst. Without further introduction, let me invite Dr. Robert Laidlaw for the session. Dr. Robert, we are all ears.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Can you see my things all right?
Yeah, we can see the screen, yes.
For some reason, that's not playing ball. It's disappointing. I want to have the live questions. Yeah, so no, look, thanks very much for the opportunity to speak today. And a very nice introduction as well, I must say. Look, I think it's a really exciting time to be in healthcare and blockchain. I think all around the world we're seeing blockchain take off in lots of ways. And I think blockchain's got lots of really unique characteristics which make it perfect for healthcare and solve some of the problems that we face every day. Now, I want this to be interactive if possible. I think that's always more enjoyable for everybody. So you can tweet to me. At Blockchain Bob is my handle, and you can put a hashtag AICTE, and that would be great. Otherwise, we'll probably get to some questions at the end as well. The real benefits of blockchain in healthcare, I think, is the traceability of information, being able to ensure that data is not tampered with, and then having privacy and security. Data as new oil is something I always like to start with. And I think the reason for that is because data is central to everything that we do in healthcare and in life as well. And most of healthcare is based with paper records, has huge amounts of errors, and leads to duplication of data and wasted opportunities. I'm just having a small error here on the computer, of course. That would be the way it would have to be, of course. Just bear with me again, sorry about that. Sorry about this. Okay, I can just click through that. This is fine. The second problem that we're seeing is really around globalization. Healthcare is no longer just something that we do in our local cities or states or countries. People travel for medical tourism, and data and digital trust is a real issue when you're going across borders. And I think blockchain solves that problem really nicely. Sharing clinical data is a third problem, and there's obviously privacy with medical data, but also the commercial concerns about large pharmaceutical corporations sharing their data. So the 5 cases that I have seen, really, as you can see on the screen, I guess, I think it's really, these are prescriptive in any means. They're just sort of the ones that I feel are really important. But credentials are licensing qualifications. Second is pharmaceuticals, is fairly self-explanatory. Medical records is the one that I'm really passionate about, and that's what my startup is, solving that problem. And research integrity, obviously research and development is a really big thing around the world, and making sure that what we learn from research is true, and we can have trust in those results is really important as well. And I think there's some really good examples in the current pandemic that have really demonstrated how trust in research. And one example was we'll talk about some examples, and then supply chain. Right. So when we think of credentials, you can think about a local Indian nurse wanting to visit somebody in the US or in Australia for a holiday, or visiting a family member, and qualifications, whilst they're usually state-based or country-based, are very seldom recognised in these other jurisdictions. And I'll show you an example coming up, but basically there's a really big propensity for credentials to be fraudulent, out of date, erroneous, and having a real-time trusted log that's immutable, that a third party or some sort of agency can do that to check, will enable a better quality of care. So an example here is, it's going back nearly 10 years now, but there was a famous outback Queensland case of a surgeon, actually I think he was Indian actually, Dr. Patel. The town was Bundaberg, and for about 5 years he practiced as a surgeon really without any credentials. And when he first applied for his job, he was able to fill out the forms that were paper-based, say that he was a surgeon, give some sort of certification from the US that may have been true at the time, but had since had updates and other conditions and notations placed on that registration. So checking or verifying the genuine status of that document was really done by just looking at a piece of paper. And I think, we're a lot more sophisticated now, and we should be able to check something in real time to make sure that a record is still true and a representation of what we're trying to say. Something more contemporary would be the COVID-19 pandemic at the moment. And for example, this story here talks about how the governor of the US has estimated at the start of the pandemic that they needed something like 50,000 new healthcare professionals to come and help serve the needs of the community. And I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with the process of credentialing health professionals. It's a pretty boring subject, I must say, but it's a very arduous paper-based process that takes weeks, if not months, to try and get somebody accepted to be able to practice medicine. And so obviously in a pandemic, we need to move quickly, and we need to credential these people straight away. And so by having a blockchain-based system, we'd be able to look up people straight away and know that they're able to legally able to work. Okay. So the second topic I'm talking about is pharmaceuticals. And I probably should have said at the start, a lot of these topics actually have multiple subtopics, and a lot of these topics also have crossover with other topics. I'm trying to keep them some sort of separate the way I view them. But in terms of pharmaceuticals, I think authenticity of pharmaceuticals is really important, and we'll explain why. And then research and development. I think there's really big opportunities in research and development that perhaps we're not realizing because all sorts of reasons that we'll explore in a moment. Okay. So look, I want to start with the story here to illustrate the point. And this young teenage boy was with his mother over in Ghana, and he was feverish. But it wasn't the malaria that was killing him. It was actually the time wasted taking fake medicines. His mother put together their last bits of money and bought what she thought was anti-malarial medication and gave that, but he continued to get worse, sicker and sicker, and sadly he eventually died waiting for dialysis at a hospital. It was later discovered that what she had in fact bought were fake medicines, and not only did they not have any effect on the malaria, in fact they were toxic to him and caused him to have renal failure and damaged his kidneys. So this is a real problem that exists now, and in terms of monetary value, it's estimated to be worth in the hundreds of billions of dollars a year. So what we can do now, rather than just relying on what it said on a packet, for example, there's a Nigerian startup here called RxAll, and they've built a handheld scanner that will scan the barcode on the box and then can sort of verify the information with the database. Now, where blockchain becomes useful in this situation is creating an immutable log that can't be changed by counterfeit entities. Information is collected, a special unique signature of the drug on the box is checked with the database and can give the person or the patient or the caregiver confidence that they're giving the right thing. Fight the Fakes is a not-for-profit organisation that's staying up to try and build solutions to solve these problems. Urge you to check out the things. So they're sponsoring a lot of blockchain projects in pharmaceutical traceability and trying to counterfeit fakes, as the name suggests. A lot of great resources on their website, actually. But I think the main ones that they're starting to target are anti-malarials, communicable diseases, HIV, things that are largely third world diseases. And I think that's really fantastic because often there's the most vulnerable people in society that are getting targeted by these really bad players. The other part of pharmaceuticals in blockchain is a really innovative collaboration between 10 large pharmaceutical companies. So you can see the logos of them there. I won't mention them by name, but I think a couple of years ago, they sort of came together, and the problem that they faced was they were spending millions, if not billions of dollars every year on research and development, drug discovery, medical research, etc. And in the process of doing that, a lot of the information that was being created was just being thrown away, essentially. And that's a great shame. It's a great waste. That information could be used by other parties to build health solutions to help people. So they've come together and built a blockchain project that essentially has built an engine that allows all of the clinical data to be put on chain and available for the other parties to use in their drug discovery, whilst safeguarding all the intellectual property of the companies. So as I mentioned before, there's the patient privacy concerns and patient security of data concerns, but there's also, just as importantly, the commercial aspects. And so historically, these companies have never shared information. They've been arch enemies because they're billion-dollar companies that are vying to be the leaders in their field. By coming together and working together, they're able to share information and still guard their intellectual property, which I think is really fantastic. So really, they put together the largest collection of small molecules and other biochemical activity to be able to create predictive models. This decentralized model, they've been able to virtualize drug discovery. And I think historically, something like this could take 13 years and cost something like $2 billion is the funding for the project. The next one to talk about, it's also probably the one I've neglected to put much information in here, but medical records, I think, is a really great use case for blockchain. That's no secret, given that that's what I'm doing with my life these days. Medical records is a huge topic, as I've discovered, and it's very easy to simplify it into one problem. The truth is there's lots of problems and they all kind of have solutions in themselves. But from a patient's point of view, at the moment in Australia, I'd be interested to hear from the audience and the professors how things are in India, but in Australia, there's only really paper records for most things in health. And it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, and yet we fax pieces of paper to one clinic, to another doctor, to a hospital. And I think there's much richer ways of communicating, storing information. And I think that would lead to patients being healthier. From a government's point of view, I think that would save money, would reduce unnecessary duplicated tests. And I think it would lead to less errors in medication management and just diagnosing diseases. I must say, India, I'm actually quite impressed with India. India's leading the world in some respects. They're they've rolled out, as I'm sure you realised, because you probably have one, a unique patient identifier to all Indian people, and all of the healthcare records are becoming linked. And this was a paper from a chap that I was reading last week, and it sort of illustrates the architecture, I guess, of how the system works. Excuse me 1 second. Should just turn that off. I just didn't, a bit naughty of me not to turn that off. You essentially have the computer infrastructure, but that needs to be watched by policy and regulations. In blockchain language, you would say that's the smart contracts or the rules that are governing how these processes work. Another quadrant is the standards interoperability. That means how do the systems connect to each other? So there's lots of different companies that build systems, and how do they talk to each other in a meaningful and efficient way? And then the fourth box is similar to what I was talking about before, but is research and development. How can we use all this information that we're generating to make us healthier, to build predictive models that are going to prevent some of these terrible things from happening? A plug here for a journal that I help with. It's called Blockchain in Healthcare Today from Boston in the US. Obviously, the name gives away what they do, but there's been countless papers that have shown the benefits of using a blockchain system for your medical record. And I think the reasons for that are better privacy, better security, the borderless nature of blockchain, being able to travel and take your records to another hospital. I mean, in Australia at the moment, you could have two specialists, doctors, in the same building in different offices, and you could see one doctor who sends you to a different one, and the system, you need to give all of your history and start again when you go to the office next door. I think in 2020, we should have systems that allow the information to pass from one to the other. There's nothing, you can imagine if you're a very sick person with lots of medical problems, speaking for an hour about your history, only to then have to do it again is frustrating, but it also leads to inaccuracies and really detracts from the main reason you're there, which is spending time that's valuable with your doctor. Okay, and hopefully we'll talk about medical records a bit further in the Q&A, I hope, because I think there's a lot more to unpack there, but I just wanted to give a bit of a flavour for that. Research integrity is something that I feel very passionate about, and it's similar to the example from Melody before with the pharmaceutical companies sharing data. There's a big missed opportunity with data not being put to its full potential. Most research and development does happen from these large pharmaceutical companies, and I think it's important to hold them to account to a certain extent. You can imagine a large pharmaceutical company studying a drug. Often that information needs to be disseminated into the scientific community, and one of the main ways that's done is from publications in academic journals, as I'm sure everybody here is aware. But if the results aren't favourable, even if the results aren't really, if they're even just neutral results that neither good nor bad, they're just no relationship, they often don't get published. And there's a lot of evidence now to show that a lot of this data is just never being disseminated in the wider community. And so I think a solution would be to have a blockchain that when the data is created, or so you can imagine doing a study on people in intensive care on a new drug, you know, some of the new drugs in COVID would be a perfect example. Instead of writing that down into a book or putting that into a database for analysis later, it could be immediately written from the source onto the blockchain. Why would you do that? I hear you say. So basically, when something's on the blockchain, as you would all know, having listened to the course this last few days, is it immutable? And so it's not going to be up to the pharmaceutical companies to ignore it, not publish it, not make it available to share. By writing the data to a blockchain, it's immutable and it has to stay there. And it's a way of having integrity for that data. And so it's a really good article here, which I've referenced, which explores that. It's certainly something that I feel quite passionate about. And I think that that's something that we could really explore a lot further in science in general. I spoke before about the benefits of sharing data whilst guarding intellectual property with the example of Melody. And that's another example in research, how we could bolster the integrity and the value of research data with blockchain technology. So the fifth one is supply chains. And like I said, there are some overlaps between these, but I think what's really pertinent to what we're talking about at the moment would be supply chains for immunizations. We've all got our fingers crossed that a vaccine is not far away. And it's probably going to be what will be the biggest supply chain management, I'm going to say, I don't want to say issue because that implies something bad's going to happen, but it's going to be the biggest experiment in supply chain in the world's history coming up in the next few months, because we're going to have something that's very much sought after with a market of lots of stakeholders that want to get their hands on it. And so I think having a way that's open and honest, transparent and auditable about how that supply chain works is going to be really crucial. That's more of a, I guess, a social issue, political issue, if you may. But there's also things like cold chain storage. And if you think of, once you combine blockchain technology with Internet of Things device, you're able to get a immutable audit log of the temperature of something like that. I mean, so actually, I think I did 2 slides up, but in Australia, much like India, I must say, if you're going to manufacture something in Sydney and then send it up to Broome, it's nearly 5,000 kilometres away. Now, I mean, you'd hope it would get on a plane, but you can imagine if it went on a truck. The temperature in the middle of Australia, like India, can be over 50 degrees at times. And so having a really clear audit log of the temperature of that vaccine is crucial for its effectiveness. And these vaccines are to overheat, they essentially render them useless. So keeping a really good log of the temperature is very important. Other things, that supply chain in itself is a huge topic. I know the Australian National Blockchain Roadmap has got a whole working group dedicated to use cases for this. So I don't necessarily think that in medicine and health it's the main one, but I think it is still important. I mean, I think COVID-19 has brought that up. Again, I get back to cross-border issues. Blockchain is perfect for things made in China or made in India, and then verifying their integrity in another country. For shipping of goods, we can verify that using the supply chain as well. In manufacturing, there's often recalls of components, materials that are used in, especially in medtech. You have titanium for screws, or all sorts of materials that are really precious and sourced from a single place. There needs to be some sort of assurance, some way of using data to show where it's come from. And I think blockchain's got a real use in that as well. All right. So look, it's kind of, they're the main points I was going to talk about. I just wanted to have a quick shout out why I had the limelight. We've had the pleasure of having a couple of interns from Dr. Jubilante's university helping us. And if there's anybody else that might be interested in getting some experience with a Australian health tech startup, we'd certainly love to have you. It's been really valuable for them, certainly been very valuable for us, and we'd like more people to join our team if anybody is interested. They're my contact details. There's my LinkedIn. Scan that and connect with me. That'd be fantastic. Or obviously with Twitter, as I said at the start, at Blockchain Bob. That's kind of the presentation for the moment. Have we got any questions? I'll just have a look over here. I can't see any questions on the Twitter. Maybe I'll ask our hosts again if they had any questions through the meeting.
Participants can unmute themselves and ask questions to Dr. Robert. Or you can type in your questions in the chat box.
I thought I'd get at least one Twitter question. That's a bit sad. There's also a good chance that I'm doing it wrong, so I shouldn't probably say that.
Dr. Robert, I've got one question.
Sure.
Actually, I'm doing my research in social epidemics. So I'm focusing on the COVID-19 pandemic. So I'd like to know how blockchain would be beneficial in tackling the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah, okay, that's a great question. So I've actually done a few webinars that have spoken about this, which I can definitely share the links for those. So if you look at the things that we spoke about today, really, I think that COVID-19 and blockchain, really all five of them would really apply. So credentialing, I think I gave the example of the needing a sudden influx of new health workers to come in and help because people were being sick and there was increased burden. So credentialing, if that was on blockchain, would be able to speed that process up, removing the paper process. With pharmaceuticals, obviously, if there's a vaccine comes out, assuring the integrity and making sure it's a genuine vaccine where it's coming from is going to be really important. So using blockchain for that would be really great. Medical records, I think having your records in a single secure place using blockchain technology has got lots of advantages. You know, you've got a single source of truth, you've got better privacy, better security, and you've got portability of your records. If you were to go from India to Melbourne, for example, you'd be able to take your records with you, and in theory, if both providers were innovative enough to be open to that technology, they'd be able to use that. I was actually working with another startup about rolling out a travel passport that's going to use your immunity, using your antibody status on an app, which is the same sort of thing, I guess, the medical records. I think that these immunity passports are going to be something that we talk about more and more. Research integrity, I feel like I'm just rehashing my talk, but research integrity is really important. The chloroquine drug that was that President Trump and all those people were talking about, that was initially being researched by the World Health Organization, and then there was a study published in The Lancet and also in the New England Journal of Medicine that said that people in hospital were at high risk of dying if they were taking it. That was later found to be based on really flawed data, and as a consequence, there's about 2 or 3 months of really important research that was put on hold because it was unclear whether that was the right thing or not. So that's a good example of data integrity. If the data potentially was on blockchain at the start, we'd have more confidence that it was the right thing. And then supply chain, again, with the vaccine, I think having a good supply chain is going to be really important.
Thank you, Dr. Robert. I think we've got some questions. Is medical data centralized or decentralized?
Okay, that's a good question. I guess the short answer is it's whatever you want it to be. But look, it's a good, very interesting controversy at the moment. One train of thought would be that it should be centralized and on a private blockchain, as it were, because it's security and the privacy can be controlled by one player. But I think a blockchain purist would argue that that would eliminate some of most of the properties that we like in blockchain while we use it in the first place. So look, I think ideally it should be a decentralized database that's spread out everywhere. It's better security, it's got better access, it's democratized. But certainly I think a lot of the larger projects that are working at the moment are, for example, IBM's Hyperledger is a private blockchain that's, you would argue, is centralized.
We've got another question from one of the participants. So he's a postgraduate student and doing his project on developing supply chain resilience with blockchain technology. How could I take up?
Okay. I mean, I guess in health, it's probably a really great time to be doing that. Maybe find a startup that has a problem that you could help with, and try and write some papers to do with what they're doing, or get involved in one of their projects. it's a PhD project, then obviously into thesis and a topic. Like you said, you're doing social science at the moment, so there's lots of use cases around. There's lots of startups solving these problems. So I think supply chain will probably be the big topic at the moment, given the impending rollout of the COVID-19 vaccine.
We have another question. What type of problems are there in pharmaceutical sectors for setting things in blockchain systems?
What problems are there in blockchain systems for?
What problems are there in pharma sectors for setting things in blockchain system?
So look, I think again, some of the things I spoke about are really things that they're tackling at the moment. I think pharmaceutical companies care about money a lot, and so anything that's going to save money would be a problem worth talking about to a pharmaceutical company. And I think one of the biggest problems I hear talking to executives in pharmaceutical companies, I was in Amsterdam last year talking to the Boehringer Ingelheim crowd, and they were talking about the amount of time it takes to do a clinical trial. It's often from when you have an idea about a new molecule or a new treatment, it can be at least 10 years, if not billions of dollars, to take it through its various stages of research and development, and then the clinical trial phases. And I think having accelerated clinical trials would be invaluable for pharmaceutical companies. And so I think real-time reporting is something that clinical trials is crying out for. At the moment, first, I guess the timeline is you go out and recruit hundreds, if not thousands of participants, and then they meet some sort of criteria. Inevitably, a proportion of them fall out for whatever reason. You ask them what's happening over a period of time and follow them for often periods of years. And the information that comes back from them, how are you feeling, side effects, other conditions that have developed, is reported, goes through their company, and the whole process is really, really slow and archaic, and perhaps not paper-based per se, but I think there's a lot of very manual processes. So I think the clinical trial process could be sped up a factor of 10 probably, if a lot of these projects were using sort of some of these technologies. And I think combined with then aggregating data across borders, obviously, in Australia, we like to do that. We're a very small population, so it's difficult for us to get decent sample sizes of anything. So invariably, we need to connect our data sets to others around the world. And a technology like this, I think, would be really, really valuable. So I think taking that problem, taking that problem would be a really good one.
Thank you, Robert. We have another question from one of the participants. Using blockchain technology, is it possible to study and get the medical records or data from hospitals?
Yes, the short answer is anything's possible, especially at Secure Health Chain with my wonderful interns. I think what's really important to take a step back and say blockchain is really just part of our tech stack. We have a React Native front end on our mobile app. We use MongoDB as our backend database. They're all just technologies in our stack, and blockchain is a layer. And so there's no reason why it couldn't connect to anything. I think hospital EMRs are something that I've personally had a bit of angst and fear about, and we've really purposefully stayed away from at the moment, just because obviously they're government organisations, so and they're huge organisations. There's a lot of bureaucracy that needs to be interacted with, which can be challenging. Yeah, so I think definitely it could connect to a hospital EMR. So in terms of what's for health data, just for interest, interoperability is the really big topic at the moment. And we've sort of arrived at this situation where When Barack Obama was in power in the US, a decade ago now, I guess, nearly, he spent billions of dollars on digital health, or e-health as it was called at the time, and a bunch of things were funded, and all these amazing digital health systems were built in the US. But the unfortunate thing that was never really mandated for whatever reason is this word interoperability. And so you had corporations like Cerner, Allscripts, all these big multinational corporations with billions of dollars, and their systems couldn't talk to each other. And rather than it making this amazing electronic utopia, what kind of happened is there was exactly what we had on paper, but now on a computer in these silos that weren't able to connect. And I mean, such was the problem that now we've actually, I think the US has now legislated in many states, actually not at a federal level, to say that that they need to be able to talk to each other or interoperate. So I guess I'm getting a bit off the topic of blockchain, more onto digital health, but I think where blockchain is relevant is that whole cross-border communications. If we use blockchain in the backbone as part of our stack, then interoperating across borders, I think, is much more powerful. And we don't need to rely on sort of trust. Trust is in the software that way.
We've got another interesting question. What can blockchain do in the area of food safety?
Food safety. Well, it's drifting out of my area of expertise, but I think traceability would be something really, really useful. So I have some good friends at a food safety startup here in Australia called Escavox, and they allow, if you went to a supermarket and got a piece of fruit, you'd be able to scan the barcode, much similar to the medications, but you'd be able to see exactly each place that it's traveled to, essentially. So the farm that it was grown on, the first truck that took it to the shed, that took it to the first warehouse, etc. You'd see the dates that it was. So it was actually picked a year ago, which is amazing that an apple's still okay, but it's amazing what you can do with various gas things. And like I said, if you combine that with an IoT device, you could then also track the temperature of fresh food to see if it's something tasted bad or something. Actually, a better example is probably something like seafood. And if you got sick, you could trace back to where it all came from quite easily. When you're looking at things that are going internationally across borders, it's significantly more difficult to trace where something comes from, because you're just interacting with people that you have no jurisdiction on per se. So whilst FedEx is an international company, FedEx in China, it's a lot more difficult to get that information. But using blockchain would be a way of having a trusted third party, which is software, to trace that.
One of the participants would like to know if it is possible to maintain patient privacy while using blockchain in healthcare.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. I mean, all the data is encrypted. So it can be encrypted with the blockchain, or it can be just using standard encryption as well. It really depends on the purpose of blockchain. So there's lots of blockchains that just provide an encryption layer, or just provide a consent layer for the data, so you can switch on access to the data. You can have a consent contract, which allows both a doctor and a patient and a clinic, for example, to all say yes to sharing. So another one of our products is we have a health data marketplace, or a health data exchange. And the purpose of that is to really allow patients to share their data with the wider world easily, securely, and privately. And so you can imagine having a CAT scan of your belly for belly pain. Usually that CAT scan gets read by the radiologist, and if there's nothing wrong with it, it gets either printed out on a bit of film and put in the basement, or on a dirty server down the basement and never seen again. But I would say that should be the very first time of hundreds, if not thousands of times, that we use that as part of an aggregated data set to to build machine learning predictive models. So obviously, I'm not a machine learning expert, not even anything to do with that really, but if its first principle says that it's necessary to have lots of normal data with anything if you're going to try and be able to use machine learning to pick out abnormalities. And so it's just a very simple example of making the most of what we do. And so that's the take-home message, I guess, from a health data point of view.
Yeah, Dr. Robert, we've got a lot of questions pouring in, but I think I'll select that one of those that will really interest you.
Okay,
Can
good.
can blockchain integrate hospitals and give a trusted treatment at times of critical situations?
Yeah, it definitely can. It not only can it does already at the moment. So I was fortunate enough to visit the in Taiwan, the university hospital there. It's a private hospital, but they run all of their patient data through blockchain, and then I think now I've actually rolled out to other satellite hospitals. I think early on that was often a criticism that a patient would come in with a personal medical record and they could be obtunded, not able to give their consent, not unlocking their record. How would that play out in that setting? But I think whilst that may be true for patient records that are personal, if you're talking, the question was about hospitals, and certainly in the hospital environment, it's a perfect use case for that. There's a lot of systems that don't interoperate, even within a hospital, believe it or not. And so I think having a blockchain backbone would be fantastic. It would allow other hospitals in the network, indeed in the country, or even better, the whole world, for connecting to each other using some of the health standards that I spoke about before. I know Microsoft has an open source health standard, HL7, which is used around the world. And then actually in Melbourne from Australia, we have something called the Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources, and that's shortened to FHIR, F-H-I-R. And so that's the standards used, which was whatever language you use for the data, but that's just a way of having a protocol so they can interoperate well together. So I guess in summary to that question, it was a very convoluted answer, but I think any system that's using HL7 and FHIR will be able to interoperate together to run the system much better, and then to communicate with all other stakeholders. And so I think it's actually not a blockchain problem. It's more fundamental than that. It's what is the systems built on to start with. So yeah, I'm not sure if that makes sense. That was a bit convoluted, but I think as long as the data is being built and created and stored in a standardized way, HL7, FHIR, blockchain is certainly a way of securely and privately sharing that information. I think if it's not built on that to start with, though, it becomes difficult. I think the analogy I'd use, you sort of need to crawl before you walk, as it were. So if hospitals are using these modern standards that are open source, internationally accepted, then yeah, they could definitely work with blockchain. It could work without blockchain as well. But I mean, so that's, I guess, rounding back, the main problem is actually what things are built on in the first place, not necessarily the blockchain use or not use.
Thank you, Robert. I think I can shoot in one more question. How can we ensure the protection of sensitive data, especially when GDPR ensures the right to be forgotten?
Oh, that's a good question. I like that one. So, I mean, yeah, so that is a hot topic in blockchain healthcare, if there's such a thing. Look, I know we use a blockchain partners called Burst IQ from Colorado in the States, but not really specific to them. I think any of them are able to program a smart contract to allow the data to be forgotten. So whilst it's not technically forgotten, because it will still be there in their code, you can write a smart contract to say that it can't be accessed, which effectively is the same thing, but I don't think it's actually ever been tested in courts in the GDPR sense. And so I think that would be certainly an interesting topic, be actually a very good research project actually for somebody if they're interested in, does GDPR be satisfied using blockchain technology? Is it possible from a legal sense? I think certainly from a coding or a computer science point of view, it's possible. You can just put a smart contract to say it cannot be accessed. Everyone accepts, then that's it. But whether that would satisfy the courts, it's probably out of my pay grade at this stage.
Thank you, Dr. Robert. So I guess there are no more questions from the participants. So Dr. Robert, thank you for that wonderful session and that scintillating question and answer session. It was interesting to learn and understand the potential of blockchain in the healthcare industry. Thank you so much for being part of this AICT-sponsored STTP. We look forward to receiving you in future sessions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jacob, and thanks very much, Dr. Jubilante.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you.